Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. I am extremely glad to participate in this conference. My name is Giuliana De Francesco. As Carmen pointed out, I'm an official at the Ministry of Culture, mainly dealing with European multilateral relations. So what I would like to share with you today is some basic reflections on the relationship between culture, cultural heritage, and climate change that are based on monitoring policy developments, and also on a slightly more concrete, on an abstract level, and also on a slightly more concrete approach, still connected to the policy development. It was 1968 when the Club of Rome was established as a non-profit informal organization of intellectuals and business leaders. It's called Club of Rome from the place where they used to meet for a while. Now they are based in Winterthur in Switzerland, and they include politicians in their club. And the Club of Rome was established in order to discuss pressing global issues with a critical approach, and global issues that were perceived by them as interrelated. This group of people commissioned to the MIT, the Sloan School of Management of the MIT, a report that was published in 1972 called The Limits of Growth. It was based on computer simulations demonstrating that economic growth could not continue indefinitely because of resource depletion. The automatic mechanisms of the market, according to this report, were not sufficient to avoid the collapse of the whole system, and the state of global equilibrium should be redesigned so that the needs of each person on Earth were met. So each should have had an equal opportunity to realize their human potential, and this was the way to achieve a future for all of us. So the idea, they said, was that of a long-lasting, sustainable revolution. This was 1972, so 50 years later, fast forward, not much of our development models has changed. We are currently experiencing what is probably the hottest summer of our lives, but it's likely to possibly be the coolest of the rest of our lives. Meanwhile, things developed, at least at policy level. In 2015, there was a groundbreaking development with the Paris Climate Agreement. It was an international treaty that for the first time was committing, it was a binding agreement that was committing almost 200 countries to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, possibly 1.5 Celsius degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. And to achieve this result, countries should implement an economic and social transformation to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions. However, earlier this year, the 6th report of the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, was published. This IPCC is the UN body that is in charge of assessing knowledge and developments on climate change. And this report demonstrates that the world already risks overshooting the 1.5 target and even go well beyond this. There is hope because global greenhouse gas emissions are on one hand at the highest level in human history, but there is evidence that climate action is lowering the average annual rate of growth in global emissions. So this agreement is slowly producing an impact. However, it's not the impact that was expected, and the next few years will be critical. Something that is worth mentioning is that for the first time, this 6th IPCC report mentions social aspects of mitigation, so includes human behavior as a center of the problem and therefore of the solution. There is another report that was published a couple of years earlier in 2019, the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And this states that around 25% of animal and plant species are threatened by extinction unless urgent action is taken. So all this framework seems to be shouting to us that the time for action is now. There is still a possibility to act, but we should act fast. We are confronted with a potential cataclysm. This wording doesn't come from some activists from Fridays for Future. This was said by the Davos Forum. We are just in time to avert this cataclysm. But political agreements are not sufficient. We need certainly policies, consistent regulations. We need technologies, good technologies, helping to address this challenge. But first and foremost, we need behavioral change. And this behavioral change is certainly based on awareness and on individual sustainable choices, but apparently intellectual communication is not enough. A keyword could be cultural desirability. I don't know how well this sounds in English, but I hope this conveys the concept. So policy measures risk to result unpopular because they clash not only with economic circumstances, but against popular imaginaries, our imaginary of what is success, satisfaction, happiness. And this, unless a new cultural alignment is developed and new imaginaries are established towards acting sustainably. For example, we might want to privilege authentic experiences over consumption. This is a development that is already taking place in cultural tourism, for example. We need a value shift towards the common good, and this can be promoted by culture. Cultural and artistic organizations have a specific ability in engaging citizens and communicating with them, not only on the cognitive, but also on the emotional level, so they can reach out to a next level in human beings that is not just intellectual comprehension. Nothing changes if you do not change, is a saying by the current Deputy Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, that is an expert in climate change, Mastroianni, an Italian diplomat. And we need to understand that what is healthy and good for us is healthy and good for the planet. So we need to change the narratives of climate action and sustainable development. We should not renounce to something. We should not be subtracted something. We should not leave something aside. We should just embrace the well-being of us and the human civilization. Usually the narrative is we have to save the planet. The planet will survive in any case. It might survive without human civilization. This little thing on the down in the slide is just a meme taken from Facebook yesterday evening. It was just a joke, but this gives a feeling of what could happen. I mean, if you are happy with your garden, maybe you don't need a lot of money and status. And this can be changed also, I should go back, through narratives. For example, the Noah Arch can provide a good example of a narrative where everybody is being saved together, keeping all diversity and thriving on top of diversity. As mentioned, data sometimes are not enough because they reach out to our intellect, but they are something we sometimes left aside. They are not alone able to make change in our behavior. But culture and the arts foster participation and are powerful forces for communicating climate change risks beyond data. They can be powerful for mobilizing and motivating people and achieving the essential behavioral change. Culture and creativity can play a role there. And an example could be taken to a movie that I was just watching recently on a private platform. It's not advertised, but it uses the metaphor of an impending world-killing comet and how the society, the politics, and the journalists react to that. And this is a good metaphor for climate change and global conversation about global warming and can stimulate societal dialogue on this. This is much broader, I would say. About cultural participation, this is another keyword that is very familiar to the Compendium community, so we don't need to elaborate on that. It doesn't, well, sorry. Previous? No, next. It's a bit complicated. Okay, thank you. It was recently published, the Culture Fix, an OECD report that acknowledges how cultural participation is producing social benefits, can help tackle societal challenges such as climate change from new angles. And it also gives proof of the fact that many cities and regions are using cultural and creative sectors to address environmental issues, including harnessing artists and cultural organizations to encourage behavioral change around climate and sustainability issue. Another issue is related to cultural heritage. I'm a bit long here, so I will be very quick. Cultural heritage is put at risk by climate. This is clear on many levels. There is a concrete loss of irreplaceable assets, but at the same time, heritage is not only a victim of climate change. It can contribute to climate action, it can inspire and suggest solutions for adaptation to climate change. For example, sustainable building techniques that include cooling systems that do not harm to the environment, for example. The ICOMOS report, The Future of Our Past, in 2019 outlined the intersection of cultural heritage and climate change. And the interesting thing from this report, published in 2019, is that it adopts categories derived from the climate policy, the climate action policy: high ambition, mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, thus facilitating the dialogue with the community of experts in climate. In a few weeks, the report of a group of the Open Method of Coordination Strengthening Cultural Heritage Resilience for Climate Change will be published. This is a group of experts that was planned in 2018 when the Work Plan for Culture 2019-2022 was adopted, and in 2018 we were already all aware that there was a need for addressing this issue. The Work Plan for Culture is the main strategic document at policy level in the EU. It is also worth mentioning that the Council of Europe addressing culture, cultural heritage and landscape with an integrated approach is very well positioned to address this intersection of culture, cultural heritage and climate change. In 2019, immediately after the ICOMOS report, The Future of Our Pasts, was published, we celebrated a plenary session of the CDCPP, the Steering Committee for Culture, Heritage and Landscape, that was devoting a thematic session to climate change. There were several follow-ups. One of those is the development of policy guidelines on an integrated culture, nature, and landscape management. Another development took place earlier this year when a Council of Europe Conference of Ministers of Culture was celebrated on the 1st of April in Strasbourg under Italian chairmanship. And this highlighted the role of creativity and culture for a diverse and democratic Europe, addressing several main challenges, the digital transformation, but also the climate crisis and sustainable development. And the outcome of this conference, the declaration, recommended to the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe the adoption of a key recommendation that was adopted in May 2022 on the role of culture, cultural heritage, and landscape in helping to address global challenges. This is definitely a document worth reading that I cannot comment in detail here. The European Green Deal is the main policy framework in the EU that was aimed at transforming the European economy into climate neutral by mid-century. In the first moment, it did not address culture and cultural heritage at all, although it was addressing a whole set of policies perceived as transformative. There was a reaction by the cultural sector led by Europa Nostra that published the European Cultural Heritage Green Paper that demonstrated how culture articulates with all targets envisaged by the Green Deal for Europe and proves essential to achieve its purpose and goals. Later, the new European Bauhaus initiative was launched that is perceived as a sort of cultural heart of the Green Deal and addresses also sustainability. Another key moment for the relationship of culture with climate change was the first ever G20 Ministerial Conference on Culture in 2021. Another interesting reading is the final declaration. What is interesting for us here is that the G20 ministers will strive to build resilient society, facilitate targeted research, and increase scientific cooperation on the reciprocal effects of climate change and culture. And in the main leader declaration, they commit to give a follow-up to this declaration. If I can use 2 minutes of your time still, I would like to mention a slightly more practical experience had in the framework of the Urban Agenda for the EU, the Partnership on Culture, Cultural Heritage that is reaching its final steps. The partnership produced an action plan articulated around 11 pilot actions. This was a very interesting experience because we realized how culture, through these practical actions developed at the urban level, culture interconnects and brings a crucial contribution to very many policies, from mobility to jobs to tourism. Almost all policies can interconnect with culture. So culture is as transversal as climate action is transversal to policies. One action in particular was devoted to preparing the basis for an observatory on culture and cultural heritage and climate change. It had to perform a series of actions, including mapping the context and reflecting on a possible scope. In this process, 40 experts from all areas of policies, institutional levels, civil society were interviewed. And these interviews created a very interesting landscape and brought us to extract, I wouldn't say lessons learned, because it's still too early to call them learned, but lessons in the process of learning, I mean, reflections in evolution. Some keys are that the multi-level approach is crucial. We need the global level policy framework, but also the national, the regional, the urban level. Cities are main drivers of climate change, are places where most of our cultural heritage is located and must be actors for climate solutions. Multidisciplinarity is another key. We need dialogue across disciplinary fields. There are several interdisciplinary initiatives on the ground involving culture and climate change, but debate mainly take place within professional communities. We need to break silos, develop common languages so that real solutions can be found based on all angles, on all data. We need massive data and different professional point of view if we are to produce real change. Another aspect is that at the policy level, at local level still, and even more at higher level, national level, the role of art and the artists for communicating, inspiring, mobilizing communities is still underestimated. Whereas communities might build on their creative energy, critical approach, and sensitivity to societal challenges. To go quickly to the end, a main challenge would be to connect the thinking and the doing. Not only we need to achieve frameworks and knowledge, we need easy access to this knowledge by policymakers that cannot take a PhD in climate change and culture. We need to make this operational, and we need to act. And culture could offer a platform for connecting the thinking and the doing. So thank you very much.